wars because its independence was based on the fact that Ahimsa exists. But second, it just wanted a good global reputation. What was its capacity then? It had just got an independence and was just out of things like World War II and partition, right? Its resources were stretched and military spending gave it an opportunity cost of developing essential sectors. Most of its population was below the poverty line at that time. Second, Muslim bloc counterfactual. War would still go on their side and we can see that. Why do we think that our counterfactual, that is the status quo, is still better? Right? Firstly, by going to the UN, India prolonged an immediate war, allowing the country to focus on consolidation and stabilization of democratic institutions. The counterfactual literally risks things like democratic backsliding. But second, we just think that future wars did occur on both sides, right? But we think the breathing space for India was so incredibly important because it was a nascent democracy. But third, we just think that going to the UN helped India frame Pakistan as the aggressor and India as a peaceful nation, which contributed to the global image that they also conceive is an important impact within the debate and allowed India to be the leader of things like the non-aligned movement in the long run, right? But then, a few rebuttals to that case. Their entire case hinges upon the fact that India is going to win the war, right? We tell you 4 reasons as to why this is actually true. Firstly, wars aren't fought in isolation, right? We think things like economic stability, diplomacy, and international support are required to win the war. But secondly, India was just dealing with a lot of post-partition issues too, right? World War II among others. It was nascent and just didn't have the capacity to win. But third, even in Prop's best case, if they won the war, it is unclear as to why the same amount of resources won't be used in defending Kashmir again, right? But fourth, even in that best case, this undercuts Indian incentives as it would cause resentment with the local population, right? They give you a lot of other claims like, oh, India lost a part of Kashmir and it spent a lot of resources on defending what is not its. But we tell you that without the line of control, it is even more vague as to where Kashmir belongs to. So any and all impacts that they give you under that argument are just symmetric at best, right? First argument then, why you have better global standings. What does it look like? It looks like two things. Number one, moral high ground, but number two, being able to restore your image. Why does this happen? We think there are broadly two reasons as to why this happens. Firstly, UN involvement allowed India to exercise its claims under international law, which was incredibly important because as a nascent democracy, it had to emphasize its commitment to cooperation and coexistence, right? But second, after rejecting the UNSCC twice, India needed to reinforce the fact that it was committed to things like global leadership and global institutions for which it had to restore trust in the first place. So if India had never gone to the UN, what would be the comparative? The comparative is just that relations would be choppy, right, between the UN and India, which would also mean that India couldn't spearhead things like the non-aligned movement in the first place. We think that's inherently bad because that is what actually helps your global image. That is what we do to flip that entire second argument. Before I move on to second argument on instability, I think we have 3, 2, 4. Seeing no engagement. Okay. Second argument then on why you have increased instability. The thesis of this claim is that prolonged conflict in Kashmir without UN intervention would have stretched India's nascent government, right? Why does this happen? We think there are broadly 3 reasons as to why this happens. Firstly, the Kashmir conflict involved challenging mountainous terrain, right? Requiring extensive troop deployments and logistical support. A longer war would have needed higher amount of resources and higher death tolls, right? Why are we okay with the current death tolls and not ones later on, right? We just think that in their side, when you have no decisive sort of like line of control, we think it is much more likely that you have a lot more war because now India can go to the UN and legitimize its claim and say that Pakistan is actively violating international law by crossing this line, right? But that doesn't exist on their side of the house because there's no legitimacy to either side's claims, right? And we just think that on the basis of like going to the UN, it is just much more likely that you have this ceasefire in the first place, right? Because we tell you that the ceasefire that existed till about 1987 was so incredibly important for India's development, right? But we also tell you that because Kashmir was such a unique location, it needed a lot of resources, and know that India was just out of independence and was heavily disadvantaged, right? But second argument of why you just continuing, the second strand of why you just have more instability is that firstly at the time of independence, India was transitioning from colonial rule to self-governance, right? So the central government was still consolidating a lot of support and authority over a diverse and fragmented population, right? Prolonged military efforts would literally mean that you're diverting a large amount of resources into defending Kashmir backsliding because these institutions were overburdened. And even if not that, you would have things like inefficiency and corruption, which would hinder your economic growth in the first place. But third reason is just that military campaigns need a lot of funding, and which would literally mean that public would just protest against that because most of the people were below the poverty line. And it would also exacerbate things like separatist movements in other states, right? Because they see that India doesn't actively care about that. The comparative is just that you have some amount of peace until 1987, which is important for you to consolidate your institutions and get some amount of social stability, which is why we're so proud.